Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's show. I'm Dr. Melissa. So happy to have you tuning back in for another great episode today. We are joined by Dr. Mario Martinez. He's a best-selling author. He is a neuropsychologist, and he is known for bridging cultural beliefs and longevity, helping us to understand the role that culture plays in truly enhancing health and our well-being. We're so happy to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You are known for looking at culture, centenarians, patterns of truly how we create change. And right now, we are living, I think it's pretty fair to say, in unprecedented times of uncertainty. At the time that we're filming this, we're moving through this COVID phenomena or pandemic. And so I'm really hopeful that today you can give us some words of wisdom and even more so some actual strategies, something that we can implement to be able to support ourselves moving through uncertain times.
Of course.
Although it seems like this is kind of a new uncertainty, uncertainty is not new to humanity, is it?
Not at all. And the brain was set up for uncertainty.
That's an interesting thing because it feels so uncomfortable being in uncertainty. You know, how can we make it work to our good and maybe even learn from the past to navigate into the present?
Well, I'll just mention a little bit about cultures to put it into a culture context.
Yeah.
The culture is really the collective beliefs that a group share about important things like aesthetics, ethics, but also uncertainty. And some cultures avoid uncertainty like the plague, and other cultures welcome it and thrive with it. So it depends on the culture that you have. And in the language, sometimes, for example, there's some cultures that will say, "I hope there's no novelty in your life," which is another because novelty means bad. So that's the context that we need to look at it. But in general, what happens with our brain is better than any. Even better than my beloved Apple. It hasn't had to have an update for 150,000 years. And the reason is that it has what I call an incompleteness to it. The brain is set up so if you have analogs and if you have programs, they usually have something that has a horizon. This is as far as we can go, and then we have to update it. Well, the brain looks for incompleteness to find meaning. So, and the reason it does that is so that anything that comes up, it allows it to go in with an incompleteness and completes itself when there's meaning after. So it's set up for that. It's set up for the uncertainties and for chaos to come in. But what happens is we get really comfortable in predictability. So we get so comfortable predicting that then when it comes where the brain can actually excel, we're not used to it. We forgot all that our ancestors learned for 150,000 years as modern Homo sapiens. So that incompleteness is really important to trigger when we go into uncertainty. And the way to look at it is that, let's say a problem or an issue or a challenge, if you have a challenge that's simple, operationally simple means that you can find clearly the cost. You can go there, and there's a cost. Complicated, it means that the cost is more difficult to find, but you can find it. It's just more difficult to find. But complexity doesn't have a particular cost. You can't find cost in complexity. So what you have to do is you have to navigate it differently than we do with linear things. So the left side of the brain, as you know, it's very linear, very sequential, especially for right-handed and so forth. And it creates the illusion of stimulus and response. So when I talk to you and you show up, I think that you show up and then I respond to you and you respond to me. But the time that you show up, we'll already have an entanglement. There's an entanglement before we even have anything. But the brain tricks us, the left brain, to make sense that there's a stimulus response. You talk, I do, you do. That's the first part. And the second part is that linearity needs to end when chaos or when complexity comes in, because linearity no longer serves us. It's like you need to screw something and you can't use the hammer anymore. You have to come up with a new tool. So what the left brain does is it looks to confirm things from A to B, and it looks for confirmations. and it creates models how it's going to be. Then all of a sudden complexity comes in or chaos comes in and it's gone. So you stop immediately trying to find a way to confirm what's going on, and you go from confirmation to observation. You shift your compass, observation. And observation, what it does is it allows you to see first how the chaos is coming in, how it's manifesting itself, but it gets you out of, rather than trying to find something to confirm, how can I minimize the complexity and the chaos? How can I minimize it? Because in complexity, there are pockets of linearity, but then they break. It's like fractals, they break away. So one example that I always use is traffic. Let's say you're in LA and traffic is crazy in LA. And if you follow in one lane, you know that it's just one lane. You know that if there's an accident for that lane, that's the cause of the problem with the traffic. But given that you have, let's say, 5 or 6 lanes and you have a huge population, complexity comes in and you cannot determine how this happened, because it has that concept of the butterfly effect, where somebody gets up late and all of a sudden has all kinds of implications. So one of the things that I do when I get stuck in traffic is that you have 5 lanes and you really can't predict which lane is going to be better. You can't. So what you do is you observe for a while to see which one has the longest segment of linearity. And then you go there for a while, but knowing you're going to have to change very quickly because linearity changes in complexity. So you go to lane 2, and for there you're doing well, and all of a sudden you see it's not working anymore. You observe again. Lane 3 seems to be doing better. But the mindset is that always segments of linearity, of predictability, not predictable in the sense that you can go from A to B. And as you do that, you're reducing the time in chaos, and you're also having a good time, because you're not creating all kinds of norepinephrine and adrenaline to get you all upset. That's one of the ways to look at it. And the other is that if you realize that you can't find cause, what you do is you begin to look at patterns of process. And complexity has patterns. And they have like for example, in complexity, you can't use Euclidean geometry. You can't use circles and squares, because it's not that. You have to use fractal geometry, which means that there's iterations. So it's called disordered order. And you go into disordered order by seeing patterns, but then seeing where the patterns go, and you follow the patterns. But it's got to be observational. So you have to let go of the left brain. And you have to go more into like a cohesiveness between left and right, but also right, intuitive, spatial relations, rather than meaning and understanding and arithmetic kinds of things. So that's one of the ways to begin with it.
So a few things that I'm wanting to make sure that I'm fully understanding, because there's so much knowledge here, is that first and foremost, our brains are set up for uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't have to mean necessarily a negative or unwanted or bad thing. And yet even the definition of it can be culturally defined. Some cultures see it as a really good thing, some cultures as a not so good thing. And yet here we are today in a time in history where globally people have been disrupted from what was their norm. So whether we think that's a good disruption or an unwanted disruption, we've been disrupted. And so, kind of how do we navigate the disruption? What you were just saying is there's a few different ways to approach it. Disruption, one of the first things the brain wants to do is make sense of it. And so from a linear, left brain wants to kind of find cause and effect. And yet, this has become global, it's become very complex. And so I guess that, if we can, some people are pointing and saying, okay, well, there's fault. Here's the cause. It came from over here. And yet they're maybe still feeling very disrupted, very angry, very frustrated, very scared, very angsty through this. And so there's that part of it, that even if they've pointed a finger at a cause, what they have been told through media, through cultural editors is cause, they're still feeling a discontent within themselves. And I think that that's what I need your help with right now, Dr. Mario Martinez, is for us to go into the space of going, the brain wants to make it linear. It's more complex, yet here we are as humans feeling what we're feeling. And whether it's fear, whether it's angst, whether it's uncertainty, whether it's hopefulness, yet just kind of observing, how do we approach this time within ourselves to be maybe, and I don't know what the right word is. I mean, maybe it's grounded. I say certain. I'm using certain through these turbulent times, but maybe there really isn't a level of certainty. So how do we approach this within ourselves?
Well, yes, it's uncertainty. And what you said about people looking for blame, it's another way of saying looking for cause. If I can find the cause, because attribution is really important in our psyche, finding the cause of something. So sometimes people will go to a doctor and they'll give them a terminal diagnosis, and it's a reduction of anxiety because now they can attribute it to something. The lack of attribution is what causes this kind of a problem. But if you look at it as the brain, what does the brain need to go into that novelty? The brain needs it by observation. It needs to, if you go into the observation, the software for novelty, curiosity comes up. Never with trying to find cause, because there's no cause there. So, for example, let's look at at viral kinds of problems with corona and other viruses. It's chaotic in the sense that it happens and you don't know where it comes from. No matter where you look, it's multi-dimensional and not multi-causal. It's just a no cause. That's what complexity is. Okay. But you also find that in its chaotic process, there is a pattern. A pattern is that it usually starts around January, February, begins to peak around April, and begins to come down around May. There's a pattern. So that's why it's called disordered order. When you look at that, you begin to see that although you can't predict it, you can actually look at there are patterns that are going on. Another example, I remember when I used to go to Brazil to surf, they would tell me you have to be very careful with the undercurrents, because you could be waist high and the undercurrents come and they take you in, and the last thing you want to do is fight it. What you want to do is and it's very hard to do, but don't fight it because you'll drown. If you don't fight it, it'll eventually bring you back up. So that's an example of the kind of things that you want to, you have to hold your breath a bit and then say, okay, what's going to happen here? Okay. The other thing that happens that causes the uncertainty is that when uncertainty comes in, we lose a lot of our grounding rituals. You no longer can go to work. You no longer can do this, can do that. And the rituals are very grounding. But what happens, though, knowing that, is you can say, for example, if you quarantine at home, what do? Well, you don't go to the I self and spend the day watching television and watching the news and texting, because that's not what the cave behavior is all about. The cave behavior is going inward and being introspective. The cave behavior also requires fire. We used to eat around the fire. We used to, it was very important. It's in our DNA and it's in our epigenetic transgeneration. So what you do, you have dinners with candles. Light is what you need for real light. Well, dinners with candles. That's what I do. And then you find rituals within the cave. And we have tremendous epigenetic transfer for the hundreds of thousands of years that we spend in the forest and in the caves. So if you start looking, you'll begin to find rituals. You begin to do actually the things that are healthier for you. Look what's happening with Venice with the coronavirus. The canals are clean because people are not dumping junk into it. So there's a good learning there, but what will happen is it'll go right back and jump again. So the thing to do is to ask yourself, what kind of rituals could I create that I can maintain after the chaos? Family dinners. And also there's something that's really helpful to increase immune function, because I want to talk about immune function too, because when you're in chaos, your immunity decreases, as you know, because you get into alarm and you go into a shutdown or a slowdown of the immune system. Well, one of the things that can be done is that Aristotle, way back 2,300 years ago, said that hedonic pleasure was not enough, that pleasure for the sake of pleasure is not enough, and that we need more what he called eudaimonic pleasure, which is pleasure with service, pleasure with meaning. And after 2,300 years, there were some studies, immunological studies on psychoimmunological, that thought, okay, let's check Aristotle out and see what's going on. So they had people who are psychologically more hedonic, and the extreme of hedonic is the drug user, the drug abuser. That's hedonic completely. And then there are levels. So they were able to identify the hedonic people and the eudaimonic people. And then they measured something in the immune system. It's called CTRA, which is a group of 21 genes in immune cells that are antiviral, antibody, and inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, depending on what it needs. And they found pre-post, they checked these people, and they found that the people that were eudaimonic had better CTRA response than the people who are hedonic. And the CTRA is conserved transcriptional response to adversity. So how can you do eudaimonic things? One of the worst things that happen in chaos is people who are isolated. So what you do, the eudaimonic part would be, who could I call that's a friend or family that lives alone, and I could have some ritual where at least I talk to them once a week. You help them, and you help yourself with your CTRA, which actually increases your immunology in times of adversity.
I love it. That's actually something that's been spoken about across so many different experts. Like the big conversation we've been having, especially in the entrepreneurial space with so many businesses being affected, is saying that right now, more than ever, go give as much value as you can. It's not about give to get. It's not about making money right now. It's just saying, how can we continue? We're all going through this disrupted time. And so those that continue to show up in service, in value, in support, will continue to be the leaders that are leading and seen as the leaders to their tribe and attracting new tribes. And so really the psychoneuroimmunology component of this is that not only is it good for business and is it good for humanity, it's good for our own individual immune systems, that as we show up and we think about, who can I go help right now? Who can I support? Who can I reach out to? I love that it just really reinforces how we are wired to give.
That's right.
To give and to care for one another.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when chaos comes in, there are two, or complexity, chaos. Complexity is a part of chaos, and chaos is part of complexity. But you have two ways. Adversity comes in, and you can become someone who is constantly under criticism and constantly looking for blame, as you were saying earlier, or you can allow your DNA to come out, and during adversity, humanity comes together.
Mm.
So those are the choices that you have. And if you're into the blaming, you're not going to get into the humanity.
Right. And so am I hearing you suggest, Dr. Martinez, that really, in order to allow our humanity to come out, one of the fastest ways is to stop blaming?
Stop blaming and looking at what's going on. What can I do to take care of myself and the people that I love, and as many people as I can, as opposed to what can I do to blame and complain? But that comes from what in neuroscience called the default mode. The default mode is really the lens that we look at the world with. And if your default mode is one of finding fault in the world, then you got a wonderful reason to find fault in the world, because here it is. And what happens is that the default mode also has the response is selective perception. If you want to buy a blue Chevy, you're going to see blue Chevys wherever you go, because selective perception confirms your intention. But if you want to look for negativity in the world, you certainly will find it and you will confirm. But both are selective perception based on your default mode. So one of the ways to change the default mode is to get uncomfortable and move into humanity rather than to criticism, and feel the anxiety that you're going to feel because you're not going to be able to criticize, and learn that when complexity comes in, adversity comes in, the best thing to do is to observe and bring out the best in your humanity. And that's been built into your DNA for 200,000 years. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to bring out the right software.
I love it. Yeah, it's just running the right program in the time that you need it. And I would say that, like you said, it's a default mode. So some people are more wired. Their default mode is going to have them in more of a complaining and or finding fault. And yet they may want to be different. there part of an addictive component to that as well? They're wired that way. That's their default. You know, how likely is it that people are able to make that shift by just kind of saying, I want to, yet the default's so strong? And are there other kind of chemical components as well happening in the inner physiology that just really keeps them in default? What's the kicker? Is there some kind of kick that they need in their system and their physiology that will support that transition into a more conscious state of, moving towards humanity versus defaulting?
Yes, and there's a different, that's a great question, different psychoterminology. So you can't intellectually get out of it. It doesn't work that way, because the neuromaps require embodiment and other kinds of things that we can talk about. But to your question, what happens is that there's a part of the brain that where the dopamine receptors are, the nucleus accumbens and other parts, that are the things that turn you on. So if you learn to get turned on by criticism, you'll go there to get turned on. This is why people are unhappy when they can't criticize. So that's it's already been wired that or designed that way. But there's another way of dealing with it, that when you begin to look at compassion, when you begin to experience it, and there are techniques to do it, then another set of psychoterminology comes out. The oxytocin and the endorphins and all these other things that are really powerful that begin to gradually change your default mode. But I'll give you something very specific. For example, you're driving around and your default mode is one of criticism and the world is dangerous. And then you find that you're driving and somebody gets in front of you and almost hits you. And you get all upset and you just start blaming and not only does it not stop there, you can't wait to get to work and tell people about it so then they can out-victimize you. Oh, you think somebody got in front of you? 3 guys got in front of me the other day. So they have to out-victimize each other.
Yeah.
One of the ways to learn to break that pattern of dopamine seeking is that you stop, you take a deep breath, and you can say, okay, I'm fine, but always embodying it. Now I make a commitment that I'm going to keep this to myself. And what will happen is you'll feel a little anxiety because it's going against the grain. And then you observe your body wherever you feel, the chest, whatever, you observe it. The mind-body code for relaxation is not I want to relax, but just observing. You observe it, you say, I am going to allow myself to feel pleasure in not discussing this with anyone. And when you do that, and you actually do the behavior, your default mode begins to change because it's not getting what you feed it usually. It begins to get another, which is one of honoring your commitments, one of not being a victim, one of not creating toxicity in the environment. So gradually that begins to, the embodiment is really important, that begins to change. And I remember I did that just a couple months ago. I really got upset with this guy and I said, okay, and let me stop. And since I've done it so many times, the stopping and honoring my commitment gave me a tremendous sense of wellness and happiness, knowing that I wasn't going to do that. Then I got to a place, and it's so funny because somebody said, well, how was your drive? I said, it was great. I listened to some good music and it was good. And the other part wants to say, let me tell them what happened, but you don't. And then that begins to break the default mode.
Yeah, it's like a developing a whole new muscle. And you said a part to that I want to just gain a bit more clarity. You suggested that you actually say that I'm going to just keep this to myself, and I'm going to find pleasure in keeping this commitment to myself. So what role, because I know you do speak a lot on the power of language, what role does language play in this process? And does it have to be audible? Does that support the embodiment, or is this more of just like a rhetorical, I'm going to kind of have an inner dialogue?
Well, those are great questions. When you look at functional MRIs and you have someone create a new thought, you can see the movements to create the neural maps, but they're very, very weak. But when you embody, for example, you could, going back to that example of the traffic, you say, either you say it or in your mind you say, I'm not going to do it, but then you embody to see how that feels, because the body's not going to like it. The body's not going to like that you're not going to be a victim or you're not going to complain about the world. So then you allow that whatever tension is, by observing it, you allow it to pass. And then you say, I'm going to make a commitment to do this and this and this. How does that feel? And how I'm going to do this, how does that feel? Where does it land in your body? And then when you get there and you don't do it, how does it feel to not do it? So gradually you're desensitizing and sensitizing systems so that you get to a point. So I remember one day I had a migraine and somebody called me, how you doing? I said, doing great. I'm not lying. My feet weren't hurting and my arms weren't hurting. So I was talking about the part that works, not what doesn't work. So that's so important. It's not that you can't complain. You can complain and you can even feel sorrow for yourself, but not sorry for yourself. There's a difference. But if you use that, then you get your dopamine hit by criticism. Or you could do the IGAs that go up and the endorphins that go up by doing compassionate things. It's up to you. And what's the point? The point is you're going to live longer if you do that than if you don't.
And that's a perfect segue into, you are known for your work in, obviously, longevity and living a long life. You have spent a tremendous amount of time researching and with centenarians. And I'm curious, because centenarians have definitely lived through disruptive times, right? So even if we think about those in Okinawa, we think about World War II, we think about some of these people that are still alive that really lived through very disruptive times. Have you in your work explored that? Kind of how have these individuals, what's been the pattern maybe, if there, because maybe that wasn't the lens you were looking at your work with them, yet how have they handled disruption that's been kind of part of their sequencing also to truly live a long, thriving life?
Well, yes, that's actually, I looked for that quite a bit because I thought that these people were gifted genetically and that they had good lives, and it was the opposite. Some of them had been in concentration camps, they've been raped, it had a lot of things happen. And the anthropology of it is that they're not Pollyannish. They don't say, okay, I was raped, everything's fine, I'll forgive. No, they get angry. They have what's called righteous anger, which is good for the immune system. Righteous anger is really good to get angry when your innocence has been attacked. But then what they do is they allow it to pass by looking at how they handled it. And one example, one centenarian that I talked to had been in one of the concentration camps during the World War II with the Nazis. And I asked them, so what did you think about the SS that was guarding you? He said, oh, they're just terrible people, terrible people. What else do you remember? But what I remember the most is that there was one of the camp guards, it was 19 like I was, and we became friends, and he would sneak some food into my cell. And that's what I remember the most. We became friends. So the righteous anger, then finding the humanity, and then the next part, the humor. And then he said, but you know what was funny? When I got home, my mother said, why didn't you write me? And he started laughing and he said, Mom, the Nazis wouldn't let me write. And he was one of the few who survived from his group because of these kinds of things. So they have adversity, and they get righteously angry, but they don't hold on to it. And I said, have you forgiven these people? There's nothing to forgive. These people are animals. What am I going to do? You forgive an animal for being an animal, you let it go. So it's not even a forgiveness. It's a letting go because it's something that is obvious. It's the nature of these people to be who they were. So you don't forgive a scorpion for being a scorpion and biting you. It's their nature. So those are examples of how they deal with life. They all have a sense of humor. They know how to forgive if they have to. And they can get angry. But they can get angry in the context of what the anger is. They don't take it on and they don't create chronic anger. And they also have a sense that they always have enough time and that everybody loves them. Everybody loves them. And the psychoimmunology of it is if you believe you're being loved, even if you're not, it's good for you. The opposite, if you don't believe that anybody loves you, like some of the superstars, and they kill themselves because they don't allow it to go in. So the cultural brain is the one that allows the psychoimmunology to occur, not what's going on out there.
Interesting. Did you find that kind of that sense of everybody loves me? Did it begin within themselves first? Meaning, was it a self-worth driven awareness, or was it just this, I just tell myself everybody loves me? Like, I want I want to explore that a little bit more, because I believe that's a really powerful statement. And I know that a lot of people genuinely, struggle is the wrong word, but they have an opportunity to value themselves even more greatly than they currently do.
Yes.
And so really feeling worthy, really feeling valuable in who they are, and feeling that they are worth loving themselves. So did these centenarians already come with a strong sense of self, versus others, or was there still some that's just like, everybody loves me, even though maybe they didn't love themselves? Did you see any?
No, they love themselves. This is George Solomon, my mentor, coined it healthy narcissism. And the healthy narcissist. I don't know if I mentioned that at a parent at the lecture, but I always like to mention it because it really exemplifies what I call inclusive narcissism. This was a centenarian that I was investigating in Cuba. Went to Cuba, and they gave him a little cocktail party afterwards, and he was 101, 102. And then he comes up to me and he says, you notice how the women are looking at me? And then he says, they love me. Okay, that's the narcissism. But then the inclusive, but look at them. They're all so beautiful. All of them. And all of them were not that beautiful, but for him, they were beautiful. So he brings them into his narcissism, and it's inclusive. And that's what allows immunological function to be enhanced.
Really powerful, really powerful. So it's essentially love of self and others.
That's right. When you extend your love of self to others, and then you see in other people, you see love and you see good things, not Pollyannish again, but real. But they do. To answer your question, yes, they value themselves very much, and they think they're great.
Let's talk about kind of, because you've mentioned the Pollyanna effect a few times, and that there can be a less than optimal side to that. Let's explore that for just a minute. So this idea of, I just want to say it's okay, it's just going to be fine. It's going to be fine. For some people, being Pollyanna is maybe a coping mechanism. So what's the solution to that?
Well, the Pollyanna doesn't work really well because Pollyanna suppresses the anger and the anguish that need to be expressed. Our bodies were not made to be Pollyannish. If something happened that's bad, what the centenarians do, they experience it. They experience it, and after they experience it, then they go and look at the positive. But if you don't experience it, then what you're doing is you're overriding an emotion that's necessary. So the Pollyannish doesn't work well.
And okay, so let's talk about overriding an emotion, because I know that when there's been a catalyst, a traumatic event, something that's really impacting the system. So the centenarians have righteous anger. They feel it. They've gone through challenges, and yet they feel it in context to that event. And like you said, they don't spill it into every other area of their life. It doesn't become a chronic anger. It's a self-righteous, contextualized, and then they're able to move through it. So an emotion that is felt in its context and moved through. So I know there's a lot of research around the length of an emotion, right? And if we just let ourselves feel it, because there's this kind of innate idea that certain things, like I wish that wasn't happening. We kind of want to retract from certain things, or maybe our cultural editors have told us that we shouldn't feel that way, right? Yes. And so unconsciously there's this idea of shouldn't, and so that may prevent people from embracing the necessary self-righteous anger, that if they could allow themselves permission to embrace it, contextually speaking, they could move through and into a new state of thriving. Yet, because of the shouldn't, they have maybe put on the mask of Pollyanna, they have suppressed, or it's become chronic anger and diffused out. So what is, first and foremost, the cycle? Like, can we go from diffused anger into saying, oh, I can be self-righteously angry about this thing that happened to me? How do we begin to say, I can do this? And how long does that emotion last if we allow ourselves to move through it?
Well, you have to train yourself, because it's a developmental process that we learn so you can unlearn. And the way to deal with it is you become aware of what's going on in what context. And you allow yourself to feel sadness or anger or whatever. And unfortunately, some psychiatry really doesn't allow that to happen. You saw a partner dies and you put an antidepressant. You're not given the mourning process that you need to go through. Or if you're very happy, you might be seen as a hypomanic and they'll give you something for that. So the first thing is to be aware what's happening in this context and how am I responding to this context? What's happening? What am I feeling now happy because I hurt my foot? No, I hurt my foot and it feels terrible. You might even use some profanity. But then once you do that, you say, okay, now I'm going to allow it to happen here. And then I'm going to make sure that if I get out of here, like with the traffic issue, I'm not going to perpetuate it. I'm going to let it go and then go and see what the other context has to offer. But I'll give you an example with Tibetan lamas. I worked with some Tibetan lamas and I had a Rinpoche teacher. But here's even the evolved people like the lamas can have an issue with culture. They have the four immeasurables, as you know, and one of the four immeasurables is empathic joy, which to send joy and celebration even to your enemies. Okay, so you do the empathic joy. And in Tibetan language, there's no word for emotion. Cognition and emotion are one. That's good in a way, but it's not so good in a way, because if you do, there's no, in the training, you try to get away from anger. Anger is one of the causes of suffering and so forth. So when you do the empathic joy, and you're doing empathic joy for the Chinese, for example, who burned their temples, raped their nuns, and took over Tibet. When you do that, what's happening is you're not allowing the righteous anger to come out.
Yeah.
When the righteous anger doesn't come out, what you're saying subconsciously is saying, anger does not exist. I don't want to feel it because it doesn't exist. But the only thing the body can do is shoot out endorphins, which is an anesthetic. And the endorphins are really good, but nothing chronic is good. So the shooting of endorphins on a chronic level begins to affect the metabolism of glucose. And many of them have a very high level of frequency of diabetes type 2. So what I teach is that, okay, before you want to send empathic joy to the Chinese or whatever, get angry. Allow the anger and then go to the empathic joy. And then that works because you have embodied that, and then you can do whatever you want with it later.
Yeah. That's absolutely, that's important. And I mean, there's so many beautiful conversations, because even in your book, I mean, you talk about, kind of about illness, right? And how different emotions can lend to, and this is a case in point, by kind of not embracing that self-righteous anger, in essence, because I don't want to. We think we're doing something really good. I just want to feel joy. I want to feel joy, and that's a wonderful thing to do. Yet there's actually kind of a counterbalance, right? There's this counter contraction in our system when we are not fully feeling or embracing or acknowledging of the different components of what we need to feel.
To the unloading, that's right. And usually reductionist science always looks for a cause that is reductionistic. So for example, thinking back to the Tibetans, they'll say, well, no, the problem that they're having with the diabetes is that they came from a very cold place in Lhasa and other places in Tibet, and they go to Dharamsala, the southern part, and it's hotter, and the food, it's part that. But the people who are not lamas and left don't have that high incidence of because they don't do the foreign measurables. So it's really important to see the cause. But yeah, it's important to experience it and then move on to a higher level. But we're built in so many hundreds of thousands of years of DNA potential to express, and the reason is a survival reason. When someone does something to you, you have to get angry to protect yourself, to either fight or flight.
And that's okay to do.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, it's enhancing, immune enhancing.
Immune enhancing. And so really, when I kind of look at these amazing nuggets that you're giving us today, Dr. Martinez, is the fact of kind of step one, as we are in, whether it's now through COVID or any time when there's disruption. When there's been disruption, it's important, because the conversation started of how do we find, how do we navigate uncertainty, and And it's just going, when there is a disruption, it's okay to observe. I keep hearing you say that word observe, right? So become an observer, because there's complexity. And if we're just willing to observe instead of trying to find and blame and fix, and we can observe and then go inward, like you said, kind of ancestrally, there was that time of going into the cave. So finding in disruption, our rituals can be disrupted. So how do we kind of reconnect to some rituals for ourselves? So observe, go inward. You talked about the power of lighting candles. You talked about kind of that in that dark cave is more of that time. Let's put down our phones. Let's put down our devices. Let's put down a lot of the inputs. And also it's about beginning to acknowledge, observe, and this is my terminology, feel what we need to feel, contextually speaking, as
Yes.
the centenarians have taught us, because then we can move through and come out the other side and find even some humor, right? And some inclusive love, that inclusive narcissism that you were talking about, the love for self, the love for others. And as we are willing to give that love to self and to others, to go out and to serve another, we're boosting our immunity, we're navigating uncertainty, and we're truly moving into enhanced states of thriving.
And unfortunately, most of the cultures will actually not support that. They would rather have a victim than someone who thrives, and they would rather that you not boast about anything that you do, and they teach you pseudo humbleness. They'll teach you, you're a little girl, and you go, "Mommy, look how pretty I look." No, 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 darling, you never say you're pretty. You wait for people to tell you, and then you deny it. I love your hair. I haven't washed it in 3 days. That kind of thing. And how can you develop self-esteem that way? And usually centenarians learn that or are taught, but they learn it, that they're worthy and they have something to offer and that they have no problems. I asked a 102-year-old woman, I said, she's very attractive. I said, you're really very attractive. She said, oh, yes, yes. I've always been attractive. Ever since I was a little girl, I was attractive. Now imagine somebody saying that, and they allow her to say it at that age, but you should be able to say it at any age.
That's so beautiful. And what would you give us as a guiding post? Because we did talk about self-worth and how there's definitely an opportunity among many to further instill that. What would be your words of wisdom of how one can better curate and cultivate that inner worth, so that we can get to being able to make a comment like that with just total comfort?
Well, gratitude is another really good emotion for immune enhancement. And when someone gives you a compliment, they give you an opportunity to express gratitude rather than to express uncomfortableness. So one of the ways to begin to change that language and then embody it, someone says, I love your hair. Oh, thank you very much. And then you embody the gratitude. That's one way to begin to do it. And the other is that when you feel good about something, you can express it to other people, but you have to have a subculture that will support that. Never tell your age, because they'll put you into that portal, and they'll treat you like if you're 80, they'll treat you this way. If you're 70, they'll treat you that way. There's a politician who actually recently said that if you're over 90, they shouldn't even treat your virus because you've lived long enough. Idiots, imbeciles, because they're so into the age rather than to the humanity of the person. But cultures also punish. Most cultures will punish individuality. You go out to dinner by yourself and somebody says, just one? When they do that to me, I say, yeah, how many do you need? Oh, no, just asking, no problems. Were you expecting a problem? You see the language. And then they try to put you, they try to put you at the bar. No, I want a table. Oh, you're going to have to wait an hour. No, goodbye. You don't go back anymore. So that's the way to deal with people. So you have to be an outlier. You have to be a rebel with a good cause, because it's already set up to put you in that place of pseudo humbleness, that place that if you go by yourself, then you're not worth a table. All those things. So you got to be aware of how culture tries to mold you back into that fishbowl.
And you had said a few minutes back about Venice, the canals are clean. And yet, when we come out the other side of this, so I want to cast a vision for what could be possible, because there could be we go back to our default setting. And yet, from what you've seen, from the conversations you've been having, from what you know through your research, What do you believe is possible that could come out from this time? Is it possible that we could be looking at culture through a different lens and through ourselves? Because now with so many isolated, home, away from their normal patterns and habits and responses, and again with some angst and disruption for some time for inner work, if people choose to do that and create new rituals and new patterns. If even a percentage of people actually do the steps that you've suggested today, and they're able to, kind of have a greater definition of self and self-worth, and breaking some of those just habitual cultural norms, what do you think could be possible coming out the other side of this time with COVID?
A lot of great things. But the key is that the rituals that you create when you're at home, you have to keep them after the adversity is over. Otherwise, you go back to the old ways. That's the first thing. And second, reactance theory is really very interesting in psychology, which says that freedom equals options. The more options, the more sense of freedom. And when an option is taken away from you, it gains value. Not because the thing has more value, but because you lost the option to decide. When you're quarantined, you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to work, you can't go to movies, you can't go shopping. Those things, because you've been deprived on, gain value. So what's going to happen is the economy is going to kick in an incredible way, because people are going to go back to work, they're going to start eating, they're going to start doing all the things that they wanted to do, and it'll go right back up because of the deprivation model.
Yeah, that's my thought on it too, and I love that you're bringing science to it. So it's the deprivation law. There's a law behind it. We know that we are on our way for an upswing as we move through this time, and ideally a greater sense of self as we come into it, for an even greater appreciation of all the things that we did love and the new loves and awarenesses that we have.
And keeping what you learned, yes.
Yes, keeping what we've learned through this time. And so creating new rituals, new responses, and really keeping those. So it's a beautiful time. Like here, obviously in the US, it's spring. So I think of it, we're spring cleaning right now. We're spring cleaning our spaces, our homes, our inner mindset, ourselves, so that we get to really look at, what sparks joy, what's worth keeping, what feels really good and right, and that I want to do more of, and what is no longer serving me that I can now release and let go.
That's the key, because I was just going to say that. I'm glad you did. You want to look, when you go back to normality, look at what excessive behaviors you were doing, dysfunctional excessive behaviors. And it gives you an awareness of what you can cut back. Maybe you were drinking too much, or maybe you were talking too much, or maybe you're watching too much television outside, or maybe you were obsessed with work. Those dysfunctional excessive behaviors can be changed. So then the adversity served you well.
Yes. Yes. So the adversity served you well. Absolutely. And may this interview be serving you all well, and the time that we've got to share together. This has just been absolutely fantastic, and we'll be having more conversations in upcoming months and times, and you're a part of some really exciting projects that we'll be announcing soon. So thank you so much, Dr. Mario Martinez. And I know that you've got a brand new book, which I don't have with me today. So tell everybody really quickly where they can find out more about you, your books, your work.
The second book is The Mind, Body, Self, and that's how mind and body communicate in cultural context. And I talk about centenarians also, and in the book, at the end of the chapter, there are techniques to deal with whatever you learn in the chapter, and there's a glossary. And you can get it at Amazon or any of the bookstores. Right now, Amazon would be great, and it would be very helpful, because it provides a lot of information, not just for adversity, but for learning longevity at any age, longevity consciousness at any age.
Longevity consciousness at any age, because that is what truly will keep us thriving and optimizing and just loving this life together. So thank you so much, Dr. Mario Martinez.
You're welcome.
What an honor to have you. Definitely the Mind, Body, Self. You'll also see the Mind-Body Connection. So the covers look very similar, but the new one, instead of code, it's going to say self. And I think it's in like a red or an orange. It's in a different color.
Yes,
right?
Yes. A lot of simplicity, like Steve Jobs' idea of simplicity.
Yes. I love it. It's already a beautiful design, and it's your brand, and it's what you're all about. You're about allowing us to further enrich our mind-body connection and code to ourselves and to culture so that we continue to thrive as one human species. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. One more thing before we go.
Yes.
I love your hair.
Thank you.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Gratitude wholeheartedly.
All right. Enjoyed it, Melissa. My pleasure. Thank you. And congratulations for your work.
Thank you so much. I really do. I receive that. I appreciate you. And thank you for everything you do for so many of us, literally around the globe, because you are not one to stay seated. This is keeping you home right now, but I know that you're always out there in so many places.
And I'm enjoying it. So it's good.
Good. Absolutely. So great.
Well, great talking with you again.
Absolutely. To everybody tuning in, thanks for investing this time in yourself and your health and your well-being. And until next time, continue to go out there and make your positive impact.